Mad Monkton, Chapter 5. I had settled it in my own mind that we had better make the town of Fondi, close on the frontier, our headquarters. To begin with, and I had arranged, with the assistance of the embassy, that the leaden coffin which should follow us so far should be securely nailed up in its packing case. Besides our passports, we were well furnished with letters of introduction to the local authorities at most of the important frontier towns. And to crown all, we had money enough at our command, much thanks to Monkton's vast fortune, to make sure of the services of anyone whom we wanted to assist us all along our line of search. These various resources ensured us every facility for action, provided always that we succeeded in discovering the body of the dead duelist. But in the very probable event of our failing to do this, our future prospects, more especially after the responsibility I had undertaken, were of anything but an agreeable nature to contemplate. I confess I felt quite uneasy, almost hopeless, as we posted in the dazzling Italian sunshine along the road to Fondi. We made an easy 2 days' journey of it, for I had insisted on Monkton's account that we should travel quite slowly. On the first day, the excessive agitation of my companion a little alarmed me. He showed in many ways more symptoms of a disordered mind than I had yet observed in him, and on the second day, however, he did seem to get quite accustomed to contemplate calmly this new idea of the search on which we were now bent. And, except on one point, he was quite cheerful and composed enough. Whenever his dead uncle formed the subject of conversation, though, he still persisted, on the strength of this old prophecy, and under the influence of the apparition which he did saw, and he, or at least thought he always saw, in assertion that the corpse of Stephen Monkton, wherever it was, lay yet unburied. On every other topic he deferred to me with the utmost readiness and docility. On this he maintained his strange opinion with an obstinacy which set reason and persuasion alike at defiance. And on the third day we rested at Fondi. The packing case with the coffin in it reached us, and was deposited in a safe place under lock and key. We engaged some mules, and found a man to act as a guide who knew the country thoroughly, and it occurred to me that we had better begin by confiding the real object of our journey only to those most trustworthy people we could find among the better educated classes. For this reason, we followed, in one respect, the example of the fatal dueling party, by starting early on the morning of the fourth day, with sketch-books and colour boxes, as if we were only artists in search of the quite picturesque. After travelling some hours in a northerly direction within the Roman frontier, we halted to rest ourselves and our mules at a wide little village, far out of the tracks of tourists in general. The only person of the smallest importance in the place was the priest, and to him I addressed my first inquiries, leaving Monkton to await my return with the guide. I spoke Italian quite fluently, and correctly enough for all of our purposes, and was extremely polite and cautious in introducing my business. But in spite of all the pains I took, I only succeeded in frightening and bewildering the poor priest more and more with every fresh word I said to him. The idea of a dueling party and a dead man seemed to scare him out of his senses. He bowed, fidgeted, cast his eyes up to heaven, and piteously shrugging his shoulders, told me, with rapid Italian circumlocution, that he had not the faintest idea of what I was talking about. This, of course, was my first failure. I confess I was weak enough to feel a little dispirited when I joined Monkton and the guide. After the heat of the day was over, we resumed our journey. About 3 miles from the village, the road, or rather cart track, branched off in 2 directions. The path to the right, our guide informed us, led up among the mountains to a convent about 6 miles off. If we penetrated beyond the convent, we should soon reach the Neapolitan frontier. The path to the left led far inward on the Roman territory, and would conduct us to a small town where we could sleep for the night. Now the Roman territory presented the first and fittest field for our search, and the convent was always within easy reach, supposing we returned to Fondi unsuccessful. Besides, the path to the left had led over the widest part of the country we were starting to explore, and I was always for vanquishing the greatest difficulty first. So we decided manfully on turning to the left. The expedition in which the resolution involved us lasted a whole week, and produced no results. We discovered absolutely nothing, and returned to our headquarters at Fondi so completely baffled that we did not know whether to turn our steps next. I was made much more uneasy by the fact of our failure in Monkton than by the failure itself. His resolution appeared to break down altogether as soon as we began to retrace our steps. He became first fretful and capricious, then silent and desponding. Finally, he sank into a lethargy of body and mind that seriously alarmed me. On the morning after our return to Fondi, he showed a strange tendency to sleep incessantly, which made me suspect the existence of some physical malady in his brain. The whole day he hardly exchanged a word with me, and seemed to be never fairly awake. Early the next morning, I went into his room and found him as silent and lethargic as ever. His servant, who was with him, informed me that Alfred had once or twice before exhibited such physical symptoms of mental exhaustion as we were now observing during his father's lifetime at Wincot Abbey. This piece of information made me feel easier, and left my mind free to return to the consideration of the errand which we brought us to Fondi. I resolved to occupy the time until my companion got better in prosecuting our search by myself. This path to the right hand which led to the convent had not yet been explored, and if I set off to trace it, I need not be away from Monkton more than one night, which I should at least be able, on my return, to give him the satisfaction of knowing that one more uncertainty regarding the place of the duel had been cleared up. These considerations decided me. I left a message for my friend in case he asked where I had gone, and set out once more for the village at which we had halted when starting on our first expedition. Intending to walk to the convent, I parted company with the guide and the mules where the track branched off, leaving them to go back to the village and await my return. For the first 4 miles the path gently ascended through an open country, then became abruptly much steeper, and led me deeper and deeper among thickets and endless woods. By the time my watch informed me that I must have nearly walked my appointed distance, the view was bounded on all sides, and the sky was shut out overhead by an impervious screen of leaves and branches. I still followed my only guide, the steep path, and in 10 minutes emerged suddenly on a plot of tolerably clear and level ground, and I saw the convent before me. It was a dark, low, and sinister-looking place. Not a sign of life or movement was visible anywhere about it. There were green stains streaked the once white facade of the chapel in all directions. Moss clustered thickly in every crevice of the heavy scrolling wall that surrounded the convent. Long, lank weeds grew out of the fissure of roof and parapet, and dropping far downward, waving wearily in and out of the barred dormitory windows. The very cross opposite the entrance gate, with a shocking life-size figure in wood nailed to it, was so beset at the base with crawling creatures, and looked so slimy, green, and rotten all the way up, that I absolutely shrank from it. A bell rope with a broken handle hung by the gate. I approached it, hesitated, and I hardly know why myself, looked up the convent again, and then walked around to the back of the building, partly to gain some time to consider what I had better do next, and partly from an unaccountable curiosity that urged me, strangely to myself, to see all I could of the outside of the place before I ever attempted to gain admission to the gate. At the back of the convent I found an outhouse, built on the wall, a clumsy, decayed building, with the greater part of the roof fallen in, and with a jagged hole in one of its sides, which in all probability had windows once been. Behind the outhouse the trees grew thicker than ever. As I looked toward them, I could not determine whether the ground beyond them rose or fell, whether it was grassy or earthy or rocky. I could see nothing but all-pervading leaves, brambles, ferns, and the long grass. Not a sound broke the opposite stillness. No bird's note rose from the leafy wilderness around me, and no voice spoke in the convent garden, behind the scrolling wall. No clock struck in the chapel tower, no dog barked in the ruined outhouse. The dead silence deepened the solitude of the place inexplicably. I began to feel it weighing on my spirits. The more, because woods were never favourite places with me to walk in, and the sort of pastoral happiness which poets often represent when they sing of life in the woods, never, to my mind, has half the charm of life on the mountain or in the plains. When I am in a wood, I miss the boundless loveliness of the sky, and the delicate softness that distance gives to the earthy view beneath. I feel oppressively the change which the free air suffers when it gets imprisoned among leaves, and I am always awed, rather than pleased, by that mysterious still light which shines with such strange dim lustre in deep places among the trees. It may convince me of want of taste and absence of the due feeling for the marvellous beauties of vegetation, but I must frankly own that I never penetrated far into a wood without finding that the getting out of it again was the pleasantest part of my walk. They're getting out in the barest down, the wildest hillside, the bleakest mountain top. They're getting out anyway, so they can see the sky over me, and the view before me as far as my eye could reach. After such a confession as I have now made, it will appear surprisingly to no one that I should have felt the strongest possible inclination, while I stood by the ruined outhouse, to retrace my steps at once, and make the best of my way out of this wood. I had indeed actually turned to depart, when the remembrance of the errand which had brought me to the convent suddenly stayed my feet. Well, it seemed doubtful whether I should be admitted into the building if I rang the bell, and more than doubtful, if I were let in, whether the inhabitants would be able to afford me any clue to the information for which I was in search. However, it was my duty to Monkton to leave no means of helping him in his desperate object untried, so I resolved to go round to the front of the convent again, and ring at the gate bell at all hazards. By the merest chance I looked up as I passed the side of the outhouse where the jagged hole was, and noticed that it was pierced rather high in the wall. As I stopped to observe it, the closeness of the atmosphere in the wood seemed to be affecting me more unpleasantly than ever. I waited a minute and untied my cravat. Closeness? Surely it was something more than that. The air was even more distasteful to my nostrils than to my lungs. There was some faint, indescribable smell loading it, some smell of which I had never had any previous experience, some smell which I thought, now that my attention was directed to it, grew more and more entirely traceable in its source, the nearer I advanced to the outhouse. By the time I had tried the experiment 2 or 3 times and made myself sure of this fact, my curiosity started to become excited. There were plenty of fragments of stone and brick laying about me. I gathered some of them together and piled them up below the hole, then mounted to the top, and, feeling rather ashamed of what I was doing, peeped into the outhouse. The sight of horror that met my eyes the instant I looked through the hole is as present to my memory now as if I beheld it yesterday. I can hardly still write of it, this distance of time, without some thrill of the old terror running through me again, straight to my heart. The first impression conveyed to me, as I looked in, was of a long, recumbent object, tinged with the lightest blue colour all over, extended on trestles, and bearing a certain hideous, half-formed resemblance to a human face and figure. I looked again and felt certain of it. There were the prominences of the forehead, nose, and chin, dimly shown as under a veil. There the round outline of the chest and the hollow below it. There the points of the knees and the stiff, ghastly, upturned feet. I looked again yet more attentively. My eyes got accustomed to the dim light streaming into the broken roof, and I satisfied myself, judging by the great length of the body from head to foot, that I was looking at the corpse of a man, a corpse that apparently once had a sheet spread up over it, and that had lain rotting on the trestles under the open sky long enough for the linen to take the livid, light blue tinge of mildew and decay which now covered it. How long I remained with my eyes fixed on the dread sight of death, on that tombless, terrible wreck of humanity, poisoning the still air, and seemed even to stain the faint descending light that disclosed it, I know not. I remember a dull distant sound among the trees, as if the breeze were rising, the slow creeping on of the sound to near the place where I stood, the noiseless whirling fall of a dead leaf on the corpse below me, through the gap in the outhouse roof, and the effect of awakening my energies, of relaxing the heavy strain on my mind, which even the slight change wrought in the scene. I beheld by the falling leaf produced in me immediately. I descended to the ground, and sitting down on the heap of stones, wiped away the thick perspiration which then covered my face, and which I now become aware of the first time. It was something more than the hideous spectacle unexpectedly offered to my eyes, which had seemed to shaken my nerves, as I felt they were shaken now. Monkton's prediction that, if we succeeded in discovering his uncle's body, we should find it unburied, reoccurred to me the instant I saw the trestless and the ghastly burden. I felt assured on the instant that I had found the dead man. The old prophecy recurred to my memory, a strange yearning sorrow, a vague foreboding of ill, an inexplicable terror, as I thought of the poor lad who was awaiting my return in a distant town, struck through me with a chill of superstitious dread, robbed me of my judgment and resolution, and left me, when I had at last recovered myself, weak and dizzy, as if I had just suffered under some pang of overpowering physical pain. I hastened round to the convent gate, and rang impatiently at the bell, waited a little while, and rang again. I then heard footsteps. In the middle of the gate, just opposite my face, there was a small sliding panel, not much more than a few inches long. This was presently pushed aside from within. I saw through a bit of iron grating two dull, light grey eyes, staring quite vacantly at me, and heard a feeble, husky voice saying, "What may you please to want?" "I am a traveller," I began. "We live in a miserable place. We have nothing to show travellers here." "Oh, I didn't come to see anything. I have an important question to ask, which I believe someone in the Covenant will be able to answer. If you're not willing to let me in, at least come out and speak to me here." "Are you alone?" "Oh, yes, quite alone." "Are there no women with you?" None." The gate was slowly unbarred, with an old capuchin, very infirm and very suspicious, and very dirty. I was far too excited and impatient to waste any time in prefatory phrases, so telling the monk at once how I had looked through the hole in the outhouse, and what I had seen inside, I asked him in plain terms who the man had been whose corpse I had beheld, and why the body was left unburied. The old capuchin listened to me with watery eyes that twinkled suspiciously. He had a battered tin snuff-box in his hand, and his finger and thumb slowly chased a few scattered grains of snuff round and round the inside of the box, all the time I was speaking. When I had done, he shook his head and said, "That was certainly an ugly sight in their outhouse. One of the ugliest sights, he felt sure, that ever I had seen in all my life." "Oh, I don't want to talk of the sight," I rejoined impatiently. "I want to know who the man was, and how he died, and why he's not decently buried. Can you tell me?" The monk's finger having captured 3 or 4 grains of snuff at last, he slowly drew them into his nostrils, holding the box open under his nose the while, to prevent the possibility of wasting even a grain, sniffed once or twice luxuriously, closed the box, then looked at me again with his eyes watering and twinkling more suspiciously than before. "Yes," said the monk, "that's an ugly sight in our outhouse. A very ugly sight, certainly." I never had more difficulty in keeping my temper in my life than at that singular moment. I succeeded, however, in repressing a very disrespectful expression on the subject of monks in general, which was on the tip of my tongue, and made another attempt to conquer the old man's exasperating reserve. Fortunately for my chance of succeeding with him, I was a snuff-taker myself, and I had a box full of excellent English snuff in my pocket, which I now produced as a bribe. This was my last resource. "Oh, I thought your box seemed empty just now," said I. "Will you try a pinch of mine?" The offer was accepted with an almost youthful electricity of gesture. The capuchin took the largest pinch I've ever seen, held between my fingers and thumb, inhaled it slowly without springing a single grain, half closed his eyes, and wagging his head gently, patted me paternally on the back. "Ah, my son," said the monk, "what delectable snuff! Oh, my son and amiable traveller, give the spiritual father who loves you yet another tiny, tiny pinch. Oh, let me fill your box for you. I still have plenty left for myself." The battered tin snuff-box was given to me before I had been done speaking. The paternal hand patted my back more approvingly than ever, and the feeble husky voice grew glib and eloquent in my praise. I had evidently found out the weak side of the old capuchin, and on returning him his box, I took instant advantage of the discovery. "Well, excuse me troubling you on the subject again," I said, "but I have a particular reason for wanting to hear all that you can tell me and explaining of that horrible sight in the outhouse." "Come in," answered the monk. He drew me inside the gate, closed it, and then leading the way across the grass-grown courtyard, looking out on a weedy kitchen garden, showed me into a long room with a low ceiling, a dirty dresser, and a few rudely carved stall seats, and 1 or 2 grim, mildewed pictures of ornaments. This was the scarcity. "There's nobody here, and it's nice and cool," said the old capuchin. It was so damp I actually shivered. "Would you like to see the church?" said the monk. "A jewel of a church, if we could keep it in repair. Alas, but we can't. Malediction and misery were too poor to keep our church in repair." He shook his head and began fumbling with a large bunch of keys. "Oh, never mind the church now," said I. "Can you, or can you not, tell me what I want to know?" "Everything. From beginning to end, absolutely everything. Why, I answered the gate bell. I always answer the gate bell here," said the capuchin. What in heaven's name has the gate bell to do with the unburied corpse in your house? Listen, son of mine, and you shall know. Some time ago, some months, I'm old. I've lost some of my memory. I don't know how many months. Ah, miserable me. What a very old monk I am. Here he comforted himself with another pinch of snuff. Never mind the exact time, said I. I'm not sure I care about that. Good, said the Capuchin. Now I can go on. Well, let us say it's some months ago. We are in this convent, are all at breakfast. Wretched breakfast, son of mine, in this convent. We are at breakfast, and we hear bang, bang, twice over. Guns, says I. What are they shooting for? Says brother Jeremy. Game, says brother Vincent. Ah, game, says brother Jeremy. If I hear more, I shall send out and discover what it means, says the Father Superior. We hear no more, and we go on with our wretched breakfasts. Where did the report of the firearms come from? I inquired. Oh, from down below, beyond the big trees at the back of the convent, where there's some clear ground, nice ground. For it wasn't for the pool and puddles, but misery, how damp we are on these parts. How very, very damp. Well, what happened after the reports of firearms? You shall hear. We're still at breakfast, silent. For what have we to talk about? We have but our devotions, our kitchen garden, and our wretched bits of breakfasts and dinners. I say we're all silent, when there comes suddenly such a ring at the bell as never heard before. A devil of a ring which caught us all with our bits, our wretched bits in our mouths, and stopped us before we could swallow them. Go, brother of mine, says the Father Superior. Go, it is your duty. Go to the gate. I am brave, a very lion of a Capuchin. I slip out on tiptoe. I wait and I listen. I pull back our little shutter in the gate. I wait and I listen again. I peep through the hole. Nothing. Absolute nothing that I can see. I am brave. I am not daunted. What do I do next? I open the gate. Ah, sacred mother of mine, what do I behold lying all along our threshold? A man, dead. Big man, bigger than you, bigger than me, bigger than anybody in the convent, buttoned up tight in fine coat, black eyes, staring up at the sky, and blood soaking through and through the front of his shirt. What do? I scream. I screamed, and I ran back to the Father Superior. All the particulars of the fatal duel which I had gleaned from the French newspaper in Monkton's room at Naples reoccurred vividly to my memory. The suspicion that I had felt when I looked into the outhouse became certainty as I listened to the old monk's last words. So far I understand, said I, that the corpse you've just seen in the outhouse is the corpse of a man who you found dead outside your gate. Now tell me why you were not given the remains decent burial. Wait, answered the Capuchin. The Father Superior hears me scream. Comes out. We all run together to the gate. We lift up the big man and look at him close. Dead. Dead as this, smacks the dresser with his hand. We look again. We see a bit of paper pinned to the collar of his coat. Aha, son of mine. You started that. I thought I should make you start at last. I had started, quite indeed. That paper was doubtless the leaf mentioned in the second's unfinished narrative, as having been torn out of his pocketbook, and inscribed with a statement of how the dead man had lost his life. If proof positive were wanted to identify the dead body, here was such proof found. What do you think was written on the bit of paper? Continued the Capuchin. We read and shudder. This dead man has been killed in a duel. He, the desperate, the miserable, has died in the commission of mortal sin, and the men who saw the killing of him ask us Capuchins, holy men, servants of Helgman, children of our Lord the Pope. They ask us to give him burial. No, but we are outraged when we read that. We groan. We wring our hands. We turn away. We tear our beards. We... Wait a moment, said I, seeing that the old man was heating himself with his narrative, and was likely, unless I stopped him, to talk more and more fluently and less purpose. Wait a minute. Have you preserved the paper that was pinned to the dead man's coat? Can I look at it? The Capuchin seemed in the point of giving me an answer, and then he suddenly checked himself. I saw his eyes wander away from my face, and at the same moment heard a door softly open and close again behind me. Looking around immediately, I observed another man in the scarcity, a tall, lean, black-bearded man, in whose presence my old friend with the snuff-box suddenly became quite decorous and devotional to look at. I suspected I was in the presence of the Father Superior, and I found that I was right the moment he addressed me. "I am the Father Superior of this covenant," he said in quiet, clear tones, and looking me straight in the face while he spoke, with coldly attentive eyes. "I have heard the later part of your conversation, and I wish to know why you were so particularly anxious to see the piece of paper that was pinned to the dead man's coat." The coolness with which he avowed that he had been listening, and the quiet, imperative manner in which he put his question, perplexed and startled me. I hardly knew at first what tone I ought to take in answering him. He observed my hesitation, and attributed to the wrong cause, signed to the old Capuchin to retire, humbly stroking his long grey beard, and furtively consoling himself with a private pinch of delectable snuff. My venerable friend shuffled out of the room, making a profound obstinance at the door just before he disappeared. "Now," said the Father Superior as coldly as ever, "I am waiting, sir, for your reply." "You shall have it in the fewest possible words," said I, answering him in his own tone. "I find, to my disgust and horror, that there is an unburied corpse in an outhouse attached to your covenant. I believe that corpse to be the body of an English gentleman of rank and fortune, who was killed in a duel. I have come into this neighbourhood with the nephew and only relation of this slain man, for the express purpose of recovering his remains, and I wish to see the paper found in the body, because I believe that paper will identify it to the satisfaction of the relative to whom I have referred. Do you find my reply sufficiently straightforward, and do you mean to give me permission to look at the paper?" "I am satisfied with your reply, and see no reason for refusing you a sight of the paper," said the Father Superior, "but I have something to say first. In speaking of the impression produced on you by beholding the corpse, you use the words disgust and horror. This license of expression in relation to what you have seen in the precinct of a covenant proves to me that you are of the pale of the Holy Catholic Church. You have no right, therefore, to expect any explanation, but I will give you one, nevertheless, as a favour. The slain man died, unabsolved, in the commission of mortal sin. We infer so much from the paper which we found on his body, and we know by the evidence of our own eyes and ears that he was killed on the territories of this church, and in the act of committing direct violation of those special laws against the crime of duelling, the strict enforcement of which the Holy Father himself has urged on the faithful throughout his dominion by letters signed with his own hand. Inside this covenant the ground is consecrated, and we Catholics are not accustomed to bury the outlaws of our religion, the enemies of our Holy Father, and the violators of sacred laws and consecrated ground. Outside this covenant we have no right and no power, and if we had both, we should remember that we are monks, not gravediggers, and that the only burial with which we can have any concern is the burial with the prayers of the Church. That is all the explanation I think it necessary to give. Wait for me here, and you shall see the paper." With those words, the Father Superior left the room as quietly as he had entered it. I had hardly time to think over this bitter and ungracious explanation, and to feel a little piqued by the language and manner of the person who had given it to me, before the Father Superior returned with the paper in his hand. He placed it before me on the dresser, and I read, hurriedly, traced in pencil, the following lines. "This paper is attached to the body of the late Mr. Stephen Monkton, an Englishman of distinction who has been shot in a duel, conducted with perfect gallantry and honour on both sides. His body is placed at the door of this covenant to receive a burial at the hands of its inmates, the survivors of the encounter being obliged to separate and secure their safety by immediate flight. I, the second of the slain man, and the writer of this explanation, certify on my word of honour as a gentleman, that the shot which killed my principal on the instant was fired quite fairly, in the strictest accordance with the rules laid down beforehand for the conduct of the duel. Signed, F. F. I recognized instantly enough as the initial letter of Monsieur Forloon's name, the second of Mr. Monkton, who had died of consumption at Paris. The discovery and the identification were now complete. Nothing remained but to break the news to Alfred, and to get permission to remove the remains of the outhouse. I began almost to doubt the evidence of my own senses when I reflected that the apparent impracticability object which he had left Naples was already, by the merest chance, virtually accomplished. The evidence of the paper is decisive, said I, handing it back. There can be no doubt that the remains of the outhouse are the remains of which we have been in search. May I inquire if any obstacle will be thrown in our way should the late Mr. Monkton's nephew wish to remove his uncle's body to the family burial place in England? Where is this nephew? Asked the father spirit. He is now awaiting my return in the town of Fondi. And is he in position to prove his relationship? Certainly. He has papers with him that will be placed it beyond any doubt. Let him satisfy the civilian authorities of his claim, and he need expect no obstacle to his wishes from anyone here. I was in no humour for taking a moment longer with my sour-tempered companion than I could help. The day was wearing on me fast, and whether night overtook me or not, I was resolved never to stop on my return till I got back to Fondi. Accordingly, after telling the father superior that we might expect to hear from me again immediately, I made my bow and hastened out of the scarcity. At the convent gate stood my old friend with the tin snuff-box, waiting to let me out. Bless you, my son, said the venerable recluse, giving me a farewell pat on the shoulder. Come back soon to your spiritual father who loves you, and amiably favour him with another